liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How are you doing? It is Friday, September 8th, 2023. Time for another week-ending show. And to get you ready for a weekend, we'll read you a bunch of stories. And that's nice. And you'll all go to sleep because that's generally what happens when you read people a bunch of, well, kids anyway. I don't know what happens. I hope it doesn't happen, that you always fall asleep. But hey, if we are a sleep aid, you know, that's okay too. They make plenty of money on that market. So at any rate, good morning and get ready to go to sleep, I guess. So with a collection of stories to keep you supposedly interested over the weekend. There's lots happening, lots to be distracted with. That's what usually happens in the 15 minutes or so before going on air. I see all these other stories, some of which are very interesting, but have very little to do with what we ordinarily discuss on the show. But Friday is a day for those things. But Friday is also a day for catching up on all the things that the show is for, but we don't get to during the week. And one of them is hinted at immediately in my morning comments from Justice, as he's giving me the thumbs up that all is well. And it's the second one this time, although the first one is of interest, I'm sure. And I'm sure that it is in pocket and ready to go somewhere, but just reminding everybody. I'm not 100% sure I did park a story about this, but Fani Willis down in Fulton County, Georgia, being the feisty person that she is engaged in a war of words now with Jim Jordan because he loves to stick his nose everywhere, including into the showers when his wrestlers are showering up after practice, or at least permit other people to stick their noses in there. And he sticks his nose out the window and looks the other direction. I guess that's a more accurate description of events at Ohio State. But at any rate, he now, as I recall from the story, which I now no longer have in front of me, but we can dig one up for you if you like. Make a note to myself about that one. But Jim Jordan has been using his perch as chairman of everything. He's, the chair of every committee in the Republican House, to write angry letters to Fani Willis and to the authorities down in Georgia, demanding all sorts of information be packed up and shipped off to Congress under, threatening subpoena, no doubt, but essentially just sort of setting himself up to give me all the materials that you're using for the various trials that will result from your indictment of Donald Trump and his co-conspirators, and send them all to me. Instead of using them to conduct the trials, I want to disrupt all of that by forcing you under subpoena to send all that material to me, and then I can leak it, disclose it, what have you. And she has obviously called him out for his obstructionism and has said, as I recall from the stories, scanning the stories, that what she's saying is, well, a lot of this crosses legal lines, and you could be putting yourself in legal jeopardy, perhaps, for trying to obstruct this investigation. Of course, it's always a dicey thing when you're looking to charge sitting members of Congress for acts that they perpetrate using official letterhead. It's very often used to cover up things that would ordinarily be crimes for anyone else, but aren't for extraordinarily privileged people. But perhaps we'll get around to that story. The other one reminded me of one that I have had sitting in pocket for some time, and I do think we may have mentioned this some weeks ago. I believe the story behind the story in this one is that we learned this news in straight reporting some weeks ago, though the events are from further back, I think a year or two ago, perhaps. But now a new book is being written, and so therefore we rediscover this information. And I think we'll also probably go through a round of accusations that the authors of the book withheld this information until they published their book, but I don't think that's actually the case. I do think we learned this in concurrent reporting, or at least earlier reporting. And at any rate, what's the hint? Well, It's just as telling me Elon Musk is a war criminal. Well, I feel that way about him. You probably feel that way about him too, but maybe you need some facts to give that form. It's just, I dislike him the way I dislike most war criminals, is probably, maybe is about as far as you've gone with it. However, there is an actual claim behind it. I gotta scroll through and find the parked, there it is, the parked item in Pocket, because it didn't come with it's not displaying its lead photo and headline. But here it is, a CNN exclusive, we are told, although I do think that, again, well, there's a different angle on the reporting that makes it exclusive. The CNN exclusive begins the headline this way, besides the fact that it says CNN exclusive, : how am I in this war? And it's funny, I'm not sure how to read that, but it's how am I in this war? New Musk biography, that'd be the book, offers fresh details about the billionaire's Ukraine dilemma. That's the war that we're talking about here. And it's difficult to know with Elon Musk, is this a question of, like, if it were you or me, right, and you're accused of having meddled in some way in the Ukraine war, you would say, how am I in this war? What are you talking about? But when you're Elon Musk, and possibly doing it on purpose, you might be asking yourself, how am I in this war? How am I doing? How much money can I make from this war? I don't know. I doubt that's what he was asking himself, but that's because I assume the best about people all the time, and I'm such an optimist. Anyway, here's the story, the way CNN puts it. Elon Musk secretly ordered his engineers, you probably heard this by now, even if you didn't hear it in the first round of reporting on it, secretly ordered his engineers to turn off his company's Starlink satellite communications network near the Crimean coast last year to disrupt a Ukrainian sneak attack on the Russian naval fleet, according to an excerpt adapted from Walter Isaacson's new biography of the eccentric billionaire, titled, you'll never guess what the title is, Elon Musk. That is a hell of a title. And we're all so excited about it. Well, so okay, it's a biography of Elon Musk. It makes sense as a title. Anyway, that's why it's, I think, back in the news. But as is so often the case, we miss it the first time around, or we're reminded of it later on. And the book probably has more lurid detail, and it's long form. You can tell the story in a much more dramatic way, and so now we're all rediscovering the story. As Ukrainian submarine drones, strapped with explosives, approached the Russian fleet, that's slow-moving torpedoes, essentially, they lost connectivity and washed ashore harmlessly with live explosives on them. Isaacson writes, Musk's decision, which left Ukrainian officials begging him to turn the satellites back on, was driven by an acute fear that Russia would respond to a Ukrainian attack on Crimea with nuclear weapons. A fear driven home, this is the difficult part here, driven home by Musk's conversations with senior Russian officials. Why was he having those? According to Isaacson, whose new book is set to be released by Simon & Schuster on September 12th. At a bookstore near you. Get yours today. I don't know. Anyway, that a little bit of salesmanship at the end of that sentence. Musk's concerns over a mini Pearl Harbor, as he put it, a mini Pearl Harbor with nuclear weapons. But okay. Oh, I see. The mini Pearl Harbor is the Ukrainian submarine drone attack. I see. So, Musk's concerns over a mini Pearl Harbor, as he put it, and that has nothing to do with Mini Pearl, the performer. It's Pearl Harbor, you see. Anyway, that's an unfortunate phrasing. Anyway, his concerns did not come to pass in Crimea, but the episode reveals the unique position Musk found himself in as the war in Ukraine unfolded. Whether intended or not, he had become a power broker U.S. officials couldn't ignore. And if you've been seeing calls for nationalizing Starlink on social media lately, I'm sure the root of it is from here. Although I'm sure there are some people who have always been fans of the idea because they wanted to stick it to Elon Musk. The new book from Isaacson, the author of acclaimed biographies of Steve Jobs and Albert Einstein, a little more salesmanship there, provides fresh insights into Musk and how his existential dread of sparking a wider war drove him to spurn Ukrainian requests for Starlink systems they could use to attack the Russians. It is interesting that he is now censoring certain content on his communications networks, though he is a free speech absolutist, including the freedom to speak about guiding submarine drones laden with explosives. But apparently that's a bridge too far for a lot of people, but not for free speech absolutists. Well, maybe it's time to just admit you're not an absolutist, although we have found that out in less dramatic terms just by watching people be banned from Twitter for criticizing Elon Musk. So, anyway, after Russia disrupted Ukraine's communications systems just before its full-scale invasion in February 2022, that would be the full-scale invasion of the rest of Ukraine, Musk agreed to provide Ukraine with millions of dollars of SpaceX-made Starlink satellite terminals, which became crucial to Ukraine's military operations. Even as cellular phone and internet networks had been destroyed, the Starlink terminals allowed Ukraine to fight and stay connected. But once Ukraine began to use Starlink terminals for offensive attacks against Russia, who don't own the Crimea, technically, anyway, Musk started to second-guess that decision. How am I in this war? Or how am I in this war? Musk asks Isaacson. Starlink was not meant to be involved in wars. Well, your products get used in a lot of ways that you don't foresee. Usually that's your defense when you end up getting sued for it. I didn't know that people were going to use it this way, and it's not our business to judge how people use our communications network. We just provide it. They do what they do with it. Well, now, of course, he's decided he'll intervene in this one. Musk was soon on the phone with President Joe Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, and the Russian ambassador to the U.S. to address anxieties from Washington, D.C. to Moscow, writes Isaacson. I've skipped a line in here, right? Starlink was not meant to be involved in wars. It was so people can watch Netflix and chill and get online for school and do good, peaceful things, not drone strikes. Well, that's the nature of the biz, I guess. Meanwhile, Mikhailo, is that right? Mikhailo Fedorov, the I is on the other side of the L. Mikhailo Fedorov, a deputy prime minister of Ukraine, was pleading with Musk to restore connectivity for the submarine drones by telling Musk about their capabilities in a text message, according to Isaacson. That's not great. I just want you, the person who is changing the world through technology, to know this, Fedorov told Musk. Clearly he felt, I'm sure he wanted to call him an a-hole and demand that he turn the thing back on, but they're trying to flatter him into doing it instead. All right. Musk and SpaceX did not reply to CNN's request for comment. Musk, the CEO of electric car maker Tesla, in case you hadn't heard about that, and private space exploration firm SpaceX, replied that he was impressed with the design of the submarine drones, but that he wouldn't turn satellite coverage back on for Crimea because Ukraine, quote, is now going too far and inviting strategic defeat, according to Isaacson. And these are choices that, random billionaires should be able to make for the rest of the world. The uncharted territory that Ukrainian and U.S. officials were in, relying on the charity of an unpredictable billionaire for battlefield communications, also led to a standoff over who would pay for the Starlink terminals last fall. SpaceX has spent tens of millions of its own money sending the satellite equipment to Ukraine, according to Musk, and the company told the Pentagon that they wouldn't continue to foot the bill for the satellite gear, as CNN first reported last October. And that sounds crappy, but, we pay all of our defense contractors millions, billions of dollars for supplying this equipment. That's the business they're in. I guess I can't blame him for that one, although he maybe created unrealistic expectations by diving in headfirst and donating the materials at first. But I suppose, in fairness, removed from all other context, you can't really fault him for that or penalize him for having done that on the front end. Although his shareholders might want to penalize him for it. That's possible. After CNN's reporting, Musk reversed course, tweeting, "The hell with it, we'll just keep funding Ukraine government for free." Okay, go ahead. Gwynne, I don't know, Gwynne, Gwynne Shotwell, Musk's president at SpaceX, was livid at Musk's reversal, according to Isaacson. He won't get a big bonus, I guess, or big enough. The Pentagon had a $145 million check ready to hand me, literally. Isaacson quotes Shotwell as saying, then Elon succumbed to the BS on Twitter and to the haters at the Pentagon who leaked the story. Oh, well, these things happen, $145 million at a time. But SpaceX was eventually able to work out a deal with the U.S. and European governments to pay for another 100,000 new satellite dishes to Ukraine at the beginning of 2023, according to Isaacson. Starlink's importance in the war has not waned. Last week, the U.S. and its Five Eyes allies, as they call the group of, I can't remember who the Five Eyes are, but, our close allies with whom we share almost all intelligence, they accused Russian hackers of targeting Ukrainian commanders' battlefield communications. That's probably to be expected, I think. The Russians' malicious code was designed to intercept data sent to Starlink satellites, according to the Ukrainians. Yeah, I'd probably be doing that if I were them. That's it? That's some interesting, like they launched into what should be a new section of the story, but I guess they don't know anything about it. They just wanted to let us know that Russians may have sent malicious code to disrupt the communications over Starlink, and there you go. I mean, like I said, you should probably have been expecting that the whole time. Okay, so that's it. I should be looking around. I would do some research to try to find. I'm pretty sure that I had heard it reported in the newspapers. I don't know how long ago. I don't know if it was really contemporaneous with his doing it, but I don't know how long that story would stay buried if the Pentagon was, leaking information or trying to lean on SpaceX to continue to provide this stuff. I'm sure it must have made the news. I don't know when, and if you just try and go and search for it now, the whole timeline will be polluted with stories like this one and stories about this story, and it'll take you forever to try and find the earlier reporting about it. But if anyone has some spare time and would like to do that production work from home and send that on to me, I would certainly appreciate it. But I'm pretty sure that we found a way to make passing mention of that at some point on the show prior to today. I hope so, because then you would feel really super informed about stuff, and you'd be very happy about it. And you know how that would go. Let's see. Mighty OCD has a comment about it. Elmo didn't give a crap about the war. Hey, come on. What are you trying to do to me here? He just wanted to help Putin. That's entirely possible. But Putin's interest, of course, is in the war. And so, I don't think he cares exactly how it comes out. But it was interesting. I mean, and it would be an interesting question to ask yourself. And I'm sure Mark Zuckerberg did for a little while in 2000, or in and around the 2016 election. How did I become involved in this weird, under the radar Cold War thing between Russia and the United States? I just wanted to I had an app for originally rating how hot different girls on campus were. And now I just wanted people to be able to, grandmas to be able to use a computer thing to put up photos of their kids and grandkids. And somehow I'm involved in this clandestine war for control of Western democracies. How did I get in this war? It does happen from time to time. All right. Let's see. Oh, I had a moment ago a great way to segue into talking about a new Patreon sponsor who's come on board, and now I just have to force my way back through it. But I think I was talking about keeping you informed and foreshadowing big stories like this by noticing the reporting contemporaneously and keeping you so well informed. That's the weekend function here, and that it would motivate people like our newest Patreon sponsor, I need some sort of fanfare for that. And I don't really have anything. I have all sorts of, we got the sad trombone. That's not it. I got the dramatic music. You know what I've got here by way of the limited number of sound effects that we have. But maybe here, we'll just do this one.
Thank you, God.
Yeah, thank you, God, for bringing us Steve Halpern. Steve Halpern has joined us on Patreon as a new sponsor as of yesterday. So that was like one of the first, that's my rapid response. But I did some additional pitching yesterday, and Steve heard us, and many of you have responded in the past, not only becoming sponsors, but becoming or boosting your level of support for the show. And we try to express that appreciation by calling out as many of you whose names we can pronounce as possible, because everybody likes to hear a little acknowledgement. So there you go. Thanks and welcome, Steve. And let me also remind you, by the way, that if you are a Patreon sponsor, new thing that we've sort of picked up on in the last month or so, when we finally realized that Patreon gave us the ability, another place that we could post the podcast version of the show each afternoon. And they have a very easy to use, quick responding interface that allows me to get the show up first for Patreon sponsors. So if you're the kind of person who says, I want to hear the show again, both live and as a podcast in the afternoon, or you missed the show, or you're not a live listener and you listen by podcast all the time, and you find yourself concerned or frustrated by those days where it takes me a little longer to do the editing and get the show up and posted, and you're waiting for it to come up on Libsyn or Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, any number of different platforms that we're on, and you wish there was a express lane for, let's say, for money that you could pay and get the show that much faster. Well, now there is. Patreon has a way for us to post the show, and we have the option of locking it for Patreon sponsors only, or leaving it unlocked so that anybody can download it there. And so we went with the hybrid version of anybody can download it for free everywhere else. But at a minimum, the Patreon sponsors should be recognized. If they're going to download it on Patreon, they should be able to get it because they are sponsors there. Yes, we leave the door open for people who just can't or won't, I guess, or who pay a different way and want to be able to get it quickly. We, of course, provide it for free elsewhere, but it does take an additional amount of time. And the Libsyn publication takes a little longer, mostly because they actually, and we could abandon this part of it, I guess, but they make as part of their publication, you're supposed to write a little short blurb for distribution of notice and a link to the podcast to be sent out on Twitter. They haven't adapted to the new post Elon Musk world and eliminated Twitter or even offered a different social media platform. So it's been quite annoying. Plus, as it turns out, Elon ended up turning off whatever it is that makes it possible to use the Libsyn engine to launch those tweets. They just block them now. So they don't get published anyway, but the whole thing gets all screwy unless you put in a valid, announcement tweet in as social media content. So I do it, and then I just try to take the content and move it to Mastodon and put it out there instead. But sometimes I forget to do so. But anyway, the point is that it sometimes takes extra time as I try to puzzle out, what was the show about? Again, I can't remember. What did we say? How much of this can I fit in the space of a tweet? And you got to do some editing and drop some stories and some mentions and then edit the damn thing down to 200 and whatever characters. And it takes a while, and sometimes I don't want to do it right away because I've had it with the show by the time it comes time to fill that thing in, and I'll walk away, and it'll take an extra half an hour, sometimes an extra hour to get the show published via Libsyn, and that also delays the publication to everything else, YouTube, all the various platforms. It all feeds through Libsyn, but Patreon is a direct line, and they don't demand that sort of additional publication information. You can just put in the day, the title, upload the file, put the picture you want to illustrate to go along with it, and we put our lovely art card in there, tag it, and send it out. So it's very quick. Once I've finished the editing and saved the podcast version of the show, it's out in 2 minutes. And if you are one of our Patreon sponsors, patreon.com/KagroX, get this whole thing set up, put a couple of bucks into the kitty each month, keep us running, allow me to pay a pittance of a tribute to Scott Henderson for giving his time each day. Well, not today, as it turns out, but okay. He's off today, but every other day, pretty much, to handle the really painful part of post-production, the writing up of the summary and providing of all the links to the stories that we mentioned during the day. And I like to be able to, contribute something towards for his time, when he does that. But at any rate, join in, be a sponsor, make it worth our time to continue to do this. Give us a good excuse, at home for continuing to do it. And as a bonus, you will get exclusive rights to the very first release of each day's podcast. And remember, there's a lot of podcasts, 5 days a week, except, not this week. There's a lot of exceptions going on this week. Fine, we were off Monday, though we did put out our rerun podcast. So there were 5 shows produced for you. 5 days a week, 2 hours of entertainment. Well, except for the times when it's not 2 hours. Okay, you get the idea. There's an exception to every rule. But there's no time to tell you another story here. So we really just have to keep talking to you about the need for sponsorship and the benefits of sponsorship through Patreon in particular. However, should you prefer to use PayPal for whatever reason, I don't know what, or Square Cash app, or, want to just mail us a check, you can do that too. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time, just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's begin by reading another Mighty OCD comment. He's listening live, and he doesn't have to wait for us to publish the podcast each day. And shouldn't there be some way of monetizing this and forcing people who listen early while we do this live to pay even more? And if I could figure out really how to do that and really had the desire to make people do that, then I would be the Mark Zuckerberg of the world, I guess, but only times about 100 people who actually want to do this. I have to have a more popular product, you see. Anyway, he points out in unique fashion, let's say, and he says, he calls me what? Child of the kindly West? Okay. You're imprinting a conscience, he says, on billionaires. True. Although, well, I'll explain myself in a second. Zuck didn't care about grandmas in 2016. He cared about harvesting their data. He'd have harvested their blood if he thought he could make more money and get away with it. And that's probably true. I guess I was thinking sort of in hybrid form about this and imputing to him motives that he probably hasn't had in decades. And he may never have had the motive of, well, I just want, people and grandmas to be able to share photos. I mean, that's the elevator pitch of the whole thing, I guess, because you don't want to say, well, I want to take over the world. It's a terrible elevator pitch. By 2016, though, of course, he was clearly like, well, how much more money can I make with this thing and how can I do it? I guess in 2016, I think he may have been wondering, well, how did we get to the point? I wanted this to be, an indispensable platform, and I wanted it to be relieving the world of their data so that I could, turn around and sell it and monetize it for myself. That was clearly, the chief function of everything for him by 2016. But I do think that in protestation of his own innocence, he would likely have said to anyone who would listen, oh, how did I get involved in this thing? How did this stupid product that I just wanted to, I wanted people to use in various ways. I want them to think of it as a benign force, even if it isn't. And I want the world to think about Facebook the way the typical Facebook consumer thinks about it. It's just a place to share photos. Nothing nefarious goes on here. There's nothing that needs this kind of moderation because people are just out there having a good time on it. Okay, sure, Nazis are attacking people on it like they are with every other social media. Sure, you forget all that. But he probably was scratching his head about, geez, where did it go wrong that I now have to worry about this stupid thing? I just wanted people to pay me all their money, and I thought it was okay because they were just sharing pictures with each other. And now I'm destroying democracy. I mean, the follow-up thought may have been, well, what do I care if democracy is destroyed as long as I have enough money to have, a defensible compound somewhere with panic rooms and private armies? Is democracy worth that much to somebody who can just buy their own utopia? Well, yeah, he probably hadn't completed building it yet, so he probably fretted about it a little bit at the minimum. I don't mean that he necessarily had a conscience about it. It was just that, well, why is this my pain in the ass? How did this I just wanted to exploit everybody's interest in sharing stupid photos with one another and turn that into billions of dollars for myself. And now there's a real problem. And I didn't anticipate having to deal with an actual problem that would have impact on others and that people would look at me and say I was a jerk for not fixing it. I just wanted the money. So, all right. It's not that he had this deep, disturbance on this shadow over his conscience. What am I doing here? I can't believe that this thing I've built is destroying things. He just was like, I just want this pain in the ass to go away. Where did this come from? That's all I meant. Anyway, I'll worry about it in exchange for just part of the billions of dollars we have given him for the headache he's imposed on us. All right. Let's see. Other stories. There are many more. How can I give them priority? I don't know. We'll go in, oh my God, look at that picture order, I think. First, follow-up story. This is what we'll do. Follow-up story to yesterday's brief mention, thanks to Scott's eagle eye on this one, about the Coach Kennedy case. And we made an effort at reading it from a centrist point of view, thanks to ground.news. And then we talked all about the interesting structure of Ground News as well. And Scott has been further, I think, singing their praises in terms of an analytical tool, at the very least. It's definitely worth a look. Now I have this follow-up piece from Slate, written by Mark Joseph Stern, that promises to give a more, give a spin to the story that will make you say, now I understand why it was brought up as a topic yesterday. This was what we were looking for. The Supreme Court's fake praying coach case just got faker. That's the left-leaning news we were looking for. Thanks, Mark Joseph Stern. Here's the way he puts it. Last year, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of, you-know-who, a high school football coach's right to engage in brief, quiet, personal prayer. That's the quote, brief, quiet, personal, despite photographic evidence that his prayers were drawn out, loud, and extremely public. At the time, the decision was embarrassing enough as it rested on the fiction that the coach, Joe Kennedy, was reprimanded for, quote, private religious expression, when he was actually establishing huge prayer circles in the middle of the field. And this reminds me as I'm reading it here. Here, even the Supreme Court of the United States, which is supposed to look into delve into the weeds on everything and parse every word of every sentence, is indulging in that Republican political rhetorical trick of reductionist description of everything. Well, now he's being punished just for praying, and everyone knows prayer is a private, quiet, brief, personal thing. Of course, it's not if you are, mega church evangelical pastor or a football coach telling everybody they got to pray at the 50-yard line moments before the game. And to say, how dare you punish him for this private expression of belief when yada yada something something freedom of religion, but instead, describing this thing as what it isn't so that you can make the case for it. It's not quite the same tactic exactly as Scalia and the broccoli mandate or the Cornhusker kickback thing being supposedly determinative in the healthcare cases, even though that didn't exist, but it's not far removed from it, and perhaps, though, more akin to the reductionist. I can't believe that you're arresting people for visiting the United States Capitol. Well, that's not really what happened here, is it? Anyway, since then, the situation has only further exposed the shameful artifice of the ruling. At first, Kennedy appeared to have little interest in taking his old job back, which was supposedly what he was fighting for. Then he acknowledged that he had sold his house and moved across the country with no plans to move back. Finally, on Friday, Kennedy returned to coach one football game, and then he quit, as the Seattle Times reported on Wednesday. He has no evident desire to exercise the rights that his lawyers fought over for years of litigation. Those lawyers, however, will walk away with $1.775 million in attorney's fees paid out by the school district. And I think once you're using decimal points to describe the millions, if you're going to go to 3 decimal points, you might as well just point out that's $1,775,000. I don't think you even save a great deal of, it may even be more characters writing out the word million. I mean, substitute a comma for that. Comma 000 occupies the same space as the space, and then the MIL of million, and lion, the 4 characters afterwards, is all a big waste. Anyway, I don't know. Editors around the country, either round up 1.8 million, round down if you want $1.7 million. Nobody cares about the extra $75,000. But, all right, never mind. That's neither here nor there. Well, I mean, it is there, but let's not make it here anymore. How about that? Okay. This final chapter of the, quote, Coach Kennedy saga, and that's a good name for it, too, because remember, after having won the right to do this, he decided, I don't really want to coach anymore anyway. I think it's because there's more money running around talking about how he was oppressed than there ever was. And he doesn't even have, that love for coaching, and I want to, help raise up young men in a tradition of that. No, I don't. That's the job I was in, and then something else made me famous, and now I can make more money. Anyway, this final chapter, if it is the final chapter, was foreseeable, inevitable, really. Well before the Supreme Court handed down its decision in June of 2022, Kennedy has lived in Florida for years, which the court knew, but ignored in its race to use his case as a vehicle to expand prayer in public schools. It's the mirror image of 303 Creative, the 303 Creative case, right? The big religious freedom case handed down this June, which also rested on allegations that range from tenuous to outright bogus. Another good example of the way they invent fictions in order to do this stuff. The problem here is simple. Conservative litigators want this Supreme Court to expand a vision of religious liberty that abolishes the separation of church and state, while granting Christians a freewheeling right to discriminate, often with public funding. They are seizing upon any case that will give the court this opportunity with little concern for the truth of the underlying claims. and the Republican-appointed justices seem eager to twist reality into whatever shape necessary to give them what they want. If the justices cared to look, they could have forecast the twists that followed their decision in Kennedy's case. The case was built on a shaky foundation. Kennedy and his lawyers, led by Paul Clement and the far-right First Liberty Institute, alleged that the school district instructed him to stop praying on the field during and after football games and fired him when he refused. These prayers, he said, were hushed personal expressions of faith that players were free to join in or ignore. In truth, the prayers were a spectacle. Kennedy would gather students around him in a large circle, lift a helmet, a well-known religious artifact, the helmet, and lead them in overtly sectarian prayer. Non-Christian players felt coerced into joining, assuming, quite reasonably, that their coach would show favoritism towards those who participated. This kind of coercive religious conduct strikes at the heart of the First Amendment's Establishment Clause, which guards against sectarian indoctrination at public schools, or at least used to. In a 6-3 decision, though, the Supreme Court found that Kennedy's prayers were protected by the First Amendment's guarantees of free speech and free exercise. To reach this conclusion, Justice Neil Gorsuch's majority opinion rewrote the facts, depicting Kennedy's prayers as fleeting, muted, and unobtrusive. Justice Sonia Sotomayor's dissent repudiated this lies with pictures of the sprawling prayer circles, which Gorsuch disregarded. He instead embraced what one lower court judge decried as the siren song of a deceitful narrative of this case spun by counsel. There was, all this time, another huge red flag in Kennedy versus Bremerton. Coach Kennedy said he wanted an injunction forcing the school district to rehire him. But he lived thousands of miles away. Bremerton School District is in Washington State, where Kennedy lived when the case commenced. As it dragged on, though, he sold his home in Washington and relocated to Florida with his wife. When the school district's lawyers discovered this move, they advised the Supreme Court that the case had become moot, arguing that Kennedy clearly did not want his job back. There's another definition of moot, or another use of moot for you there, Greg. Kennedy's lawyers filed an incensed response, avowing that their client craved a return to Washington. He remains ready, willing, and able to return to his job just as soon as his constitutional rights are vindicated. It is really that simple, they wrote. But apparently it wasn't. The relocation to Florida is not permanent, they said, and Kennedy stands ready, willing, and able to move back to Bremerton as soon as humanly possible, should he prevail in this litigation and be permitted to resume his coaching duties. Indeed, they continued, he is champing at the bit to resume the job he loves. Oh boy. Attached was a declaration from Kennedy stating that if he prevailed, he would return home to Bremerton immediately. He attested, quote, I am ready and willing to resume my coaching duties in Bremerton, Washington. I can do so within 24 hours of reinstatement, if I am still temporarily residing in Florida. By that point, Kennedy had joined the conservative speaking circuit, pivoting away from his coaching career. When a court ordered the school district to rehire him, the Seattle Times' Danny Westneat, do I have that right, reported they initially did not get a response, didn't even answer their calls. While Bremerton students were preparing for a new season of football, Kennedy was meeting with former Vice President Mike Pence. On the night before their first game of the season, he was awarded an engraved rifle at the American Legion convention, because you need that for football. Meetings with former President Donald Trump and later Florida Governor Ron DeSantis crowded his calendar. Kennedy, it says parenthetically, dined with DeSantis, but remains loyal to Trump. Another fun story. And then there was the problem of housing. Kennedy had none in Bremerton, or in the entire state, or in the region, in fact. When he finally returned for his one and only game last Friday, he crashed at a friend's place. Kennedy no longer says he is, quote, temporarily residing in Florida. The Sunshine State is his home. Kennedy's previous claims otherwise were clearly a total fiction that the court bought, lock, stock, and barrel. It's all too reminiscent of 303 Creative. Of course, in that case, that was the website designer named Laurie Smith, who said Colorado's non-discrimination law forced her to make wedding websites for same-sex couples, if asked. But she never was asked. Smith's lawyers at Alliance Defending Freedom, the new group taking over from Paul Clement's operation, claimed that one gay couple, Stuart and Mike who? Stuart and Mike, indicated some vague interest in engaging her services. They seized upon this allegation as proof that Smith might imminently discriminate, break the law, and face penalties. One day before the decision, though, the New Republic's Melissa Gira Grant, I don't know if it's Gira or Gira, G-I-R-A, you know her, and she became famous with this fantastic story. She reported that Stuart and Mike do not even exist. They were made up. Smith's entire business, too, had tenuous roots in reality. It seemed to exist largely to serve as a test case for Alliance Defending Freedom. Mission accomplished. None of these deceptions stopped the court's hard-right supermajority from siding with the web designer, who never designed anything, I would add. ADF has a history of relying on shady or fictional clients as an excuse to get into court, as Supreme Court litigator Adam Unikowski has documented. Links herein provided. In 2019, ADF claimed to represent a calligraphy company that refused to make wedding invitations for same-sex couples, though a two was never asked. The company emerged shortly before ADF filed a lawsuit on its behalf and then disappeared shortly after the Arizona Supreme Court ruled in its favor. So the company never really existed. The company never had any clients. They just were made up. Wouldn't it be great if we could test this case with a hypothetical? Well, you're not allowed to do that. Oh, okay. Well, we'll just fake that the company is real, and then it won't be a hypothetical. No, it's still a hypothetical. It's just you paid a filing fee for a corporation and then lied about what you did once you were incorporated. Now, instead of it being a hypothetical, it's just a lie. You should be getting sanctioned by the court. Anyway, so that's what happened. The company in this calligraphy case emerged, basically, they created it, then pretended to exist, and then pretended to be in trouble with the law. Then ADF filed a lawsuit on its behalf. They won the lawsuit, and then they said, all right, we're not paying for licensing fees for this company anymore. We're not going to pay its taxes. Let's just close the company. We won, but let's close the company because it served its purpose. It was never to do calligraphy. It was to allow for this suit to take place. Its website was then taken over by an Indonesian casino because they were very protective of their reputation online. ADF also represented a supposed videography company in Minnesota, Telescope Media Group, that did not want to film weddings for same-sex couples. You guessed it, no one ever asked. In 2019, an appeals court issued a preliminary injunction granting it the right to discriminate. Not that they really wanted to do any video production. Rather than throw in the towel, Minnesota decided to pursue its hunch that Telescope Media Group was essentially not real. It sought discovery that would, among other things, reveal the company's origins and ongoing business practices, if they existed. ADF abruptly moved to dismiss their own case, stating for the first time that Telescope Media had pivoted away from wedding videos. You see, it's unclear, by the way, if they had ever filmed one. Minnesota resisted, declaring its intent to test ADF's highly fanciful allegations and prove that the group had taken advantage of the judicial system and now wished to avoid the merits of the case. ADF was so desperate to dodge discovery that it then moved to dismiss its own case with prejudice, formally killing it, despite the fact that ADF had won once and was almost guaranteed to win again. Due to this desperate maneuver, the ADF lost out on hundreds of thousands of dollars in attorney's fees, but this was done seemingly to avoid any more facts coming out about the true nature of its client's business. We should expect nothing less from the organization that lied so shamelessly about medication abortion in pursuit of a nationwide ban on mifepristone. But we should expect more from the courts, which sided with the fabulists in each of these other cases. The Constitution limits the federal judiciary to live controversies. And the ADF strategy shows one reason why. When interest groups can manufacture cases, they give the courts a chance to make sweeping policy announcements with ambiguous applications in the real world. The Supreme Court's decisions in Kennedy And 303 Creative did not provide meaningful relief to the ostensible plaintiffs. That's what makes a real live controversy. There has to be a real injury, in fact. Rather, Kennedy gave the green light to more school-sponsored prayer, while 303 Creative rolled back the rights of same-sex couples by denying them equal access to the market. ADF will now find or engineer new clients to push the limits of those rulings. Coach Kennedy moved on from his own litigation long ago, but there's an endless supply of culture warriors who will gladly serve as the protagonist of ADF's next fictional case. By playing along with those illusory cases, the Supreme Court shows itself to be an easy mark, or perhaps an all too willing dupe. Ooh, that's calling for like dramatic music. That's it. That's a pretty good point, and I think that helps us wrap up on that story and gives a good ending to it, puts a real exclamation point on it, and brings us back to the larger point, which we should have been able to, put together for ourselves yesterday. But thoughts are scattered. That gives me an idea about what we might do next. We'll try this one too. What would a Friday be, or in fact, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, if it wasn't for the opportunity to read an Amanda Marcotte piece? She should probably be co-hosting this show, as a matter of fact, but I never asked. And I figure she's busy. And I want to be able to do my own thing. So, at any rate, she doesn't need any help getting her stories to light, although I'm happy to provide it because they're always good ones. This, a slight departure from this other stuff, but I'm reminded of this story because of sort of the manufacture of narratives. They're not involved in any litigation yet, although they will be involved in some criminal litigation very shortly. But they may also, who knows what kind of defense they'll offer. They'll probably fall back on this, their defenses, including the now infamous cry of parents' rights, as we hear all the time here in Virginia and elsewhere around the country, of course, because the Republicans are convinced that it works. Here's the story, totally different, again, in Salon from today, right? Another Christian influencer has been arrested for child abuse. The Republican squad once again going down to arrest. Why conservatives keep falling for these cons. And it's a very specific kind of con. The people at the center of the controversy here, or the woman at the center of the controversy, Ruby Frank. That's with an E. Franke. Not, people say things like Frank with an E. Oh yeah, Efrank? No, it goes on the end. Ruby Frank was another Duggar knockoff, giant family lady, right? Putting a shiny happy gloss on religious oppression. So what's going on here? I have no idea. I had no idea. I never heard of this person, but it's kind of intriguing when you find out about the fact that apparently there's a whole world of YouTube influencers out there who, taking cues from the Duggars, say, let's have a giant family and then film everything that we do and say that we're awesome and make some money. And why people want to watch, a family of 6 eat mac and cheese happily together and pray about it, I don't know, but apparently they do. Maybe Amanda knows a little bit more about why they do it, but here's the story. In many ways, it's the least surprising story of our times. Maybe. A showily Christian conservative holds themselves out to be a moral arbiter for others to follow, but is soon exposed as a hypocrite and villain, accused of violence or abuse against the vulnerable people they claimed to champion. That's it. That's the whole story, really, in one sentence. She's right. It could be the establishment of the Catholic Church, which covered up sexual abuse by priests for years, or the Southern Baptist Convention, which also spent decades reflexively shielding abusers, or Jerry Falwell Jr. and Liberty University, or the Duggar family from TLC's reality TV series, and their religious leader, Bill Gothard, is that right? I hesitate to mention that it could be pronounced differently and in a very suspicious way, but you tell me, Gothard? Is it Gothard or is it that other thing? Anyway, the drumbeat of similar stories is unrelenting. Quite correct. Once a person holds themselves out to be an exemplar of clean Christian living, It feels like it's just a matter of time before their closet full of dark secrets comes spilling out. And that's, of course, because every Republican accusation is a confession, closely related. So, it wasn't really a shock when another Christian right celebrity, Ruby Frank of the YouTube series 8 Passengers, 6 kids, you see, 8 Passengers, was recently arrested and charged with 6, get it, charges of felony child abuse. That is to say, every single one of her children. Frank was part of a new crop of Christian, quote, influencers who have recreated the Duggar family's reality TV success for the social media era. There seems to be an unending number of these content creators. They rake in massive views and advertisers by dishing up a fantasy of blindingly white, well-scrubbed, wholesome family life. And I guess that's what I'm doing wrong. I don't rake in massive views and advertisers in any way. But I need to be lying more, I guess, is the lesson. Frank was a bog standard example. A thin Mormon housewife with 6 kids and expensive-looking blonde hair. That's an interesting way of putting it. Living in small-town Utah. She and her husband, Kevin Frank, kept up a YouTube channel documenting how their strict religious parenting style supposedly led to an upright and enviable life. She partnered with Connections Classroom. Connections is spelled like you would think, except instead of the T in CT, Connect. Eons, it's a big X in the middle. Not for X-rated exploitation of children, wink, wink, but rather probably a reference to the cross. So, Connects Eons Classroom, which bills itself as a counseling service to, quote, create joy in your life and relationships, unquote. Wink, wink, X. All this is advertised with familiar imagery, laughing children in fields, like a laughing woman with salad, right? In this context, content. No, it's content. Content-looking white wives. Also content-looking. I guess they look like content. White wives in well-appointed kitchens, ruggedly handsome husbands with full heads of hair. That does seem like the template, doesn't it? But behind the scenes, according to police and prosecutors, who we don't always love, but they do fulfill a function in this society. According to police and prosecutors, behind the scenes was massive amounts of child abuse, which was exposed when, what happened? Frank's 12-year-old son escaped out of a window of the home of one Jody Hildebrandt, a business partner of Frank's who runs Connections. The boy reportedly had duct tape on his arms and legs and was starving. They're taking great care of their 8 passengers. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. By the way, explanation offered up by Mighty OCD on the Child of the Kindly West thing, saying, I thought you were a Lord of the Rings guy, or maybe that was Greg. Greg probably would recognize it. Child of the Kindly West apparently is how Thorin starts his speech to Bilbo after the War of the Five Armies, which is good information, good to know. I am not a big Lord of the Rings guy. I have passing familiarity with it. As opposed to being a Lord of the Rings guy, I am a fall asleep in my chair while my wife watches Lord of the Rings movies on TV guy. So some of this is drummed into my subconscious, I guess, by listening to it while I'm sleeping through it. I've seen... I don't know if I've ever seen any of these movies all the way through, but that happens. And by the way, I will fall asleep in the theater chairs as well when we go and see these things. I kind of enjoy, I'll watch. It's a great thing to do with your eyeballs when there's nothing else going on. I fall asleep a lot. And so a lot of times I have a very distorted vision of what is happening in these stories because I dream half of it. And I wake up and I say, did he just say dinner was ready? I don't understand what's going on in this movie. All right. Well, at any rate, just thought I would fess up to that reality. Before jumping back into Amanda Marcotte's telling of the story of the latest bust of a conservative Christian for proclaiming themselves upright and godly, but actually being devil incarnate. What do you know? Behind the scenes, as we found out, there was child abuse going on. We found this out because the Frank's 12-year-old son escaped out of a window of the home of, again, Jody Hildebrandt, who runs Connections, with an X, wink, wink. The boy reportedly had duct tape on his arms and legs and was starving. Sounds good, right? His 10-year-old sister was found in the house, reportedly also malnourished. 4 minors were taken into care by the Department of Child and Family Services, according to a statement from the Santa Clara Ivans Public Safety Department. That's Santa Clara-Ivans. Okay, -Ivans. Frank's oldest daughter responded with gratitude for the arrest on Instagram. And it is embedded herein, I guess. And you can read it for yourself. Or no, I guess I could read it for you. Her Instagram reads, there's a picture of the police at the home with the caption, "Finally." And then on her account, official Shari Frank, that's her name, Shari. Hi all, today has been a big day. Me and my family are so glad justice is being served. We've been trying to tell the police and CPS for years about this, and so glad they finally decided to step up. Kids are safe, but there's a long road ahead. Please keep them in your prayers. Oh, might as well stick with the prayer game. And also respect their privacy. Yeah, hard to do when they're in the middle of a story like that. But at any rate, interesting to see. And I guess some of the kids have moved out of the house somehow, but mostly kept their silence, I guess, leaning more towards the privacy thing than anything else. And you can understand why. But it's just an amazing story. And I wonder about the malnutrition thing. I mean, as it turns out, it's part of their punishment regimen for their godly upbringing of their kids, is what they say. But I wonder whether it isn't, well, I'm starving them to keep them thin because the camera adds 10 pounds and these kids are going to be living on camera to produce content that I can monetize. And I have to keep them, in this condition and then put makeup over the bruises, I guess, so that I can continue to make money from this. I'll let Amanda tell the rest of the story because I don't know anything about it. It's grim stuff, but also just exactly what cynical secularists of the left expect, right? The cynical secularists who always suspect that every conservative, accusation is really a confession. Because it is. I mean, they seem cynical, but they're right. Anyway, what's so confounding about this story is that so many other people were buying Frank's BS image of herself. And thank you for using BS. It's a good family image for Salon. BS image of herself. She had over 2 million subscribers on her YouTube channel. And yeah, again, drives me up the wall to read stuff like that. I mean, she's producing content, not only that is BS, but I mean, it's stupid BS. Like, okay, I can understand inventing a fabulous story and having people intrigued by it, but what's so interesting about a family of 6 kids and like, okay, we're strict Christian upbringing. Yeah, okay. I mean, I can kind of guess what that's going to be like. 2 million people are watching her spread Miracle Whip on white bread. Why? And then punishing her kids, I guess, for not liking it. I don't know what the hell's going on. But I mean, I guess there's drama in any family story, but that's just it to me. It's like, I don't need anybody else's content to understand that. And especially when it's this fake ass crap. Honest to God, 2 million people watching mayonnaise happen. And we're like, would you please listen to the news and some actual discussion about what's going on in the world from a perspective that you don't get very many places, and maybe some explanation of the complexities of things that you say, well, now I understand what the hell's going on in the world. What can I have 1 million subscribers? Can I have 500,000? Can I have 100,000 subscribers? We're way behind on this. I don't know. I mean, I guess you just got to dress it up, or maybe it's YouTube that does it, but I don't know. Is video the key to all of this? Do I need to capture some children and starve them? Well, is that the path to success? She had 2 million subscribers. While some of those people were skeptics, Amanda reminds us, by and large, it was the same audience you always get for these Christian influencers. People who desperately want to believe in this fairy tale of shiny, happy, perfect white Christian families. All right, well, maybe that's the key. Anyway, she says it's not like the red flags weren't there either, by the way. The Franks made a big deal out of being strict disciplinarians on their channel, which led to describing, of course, the punishments of their children. A 15-year-old, for instance, this is some punishment. They were very inventive. I mean, in a cruel and horrible way that probably should have gotten them arrested a lot sooner. But this is an inventive one. I never thought about this one. 15-year-old who played a prank on a younger brother, obviously in need of punishment, right? Playing pranks. The punishment, deprived of a bed for 7 months. There's one thing I've never thought of. To me, the punishment is go to bed. I didn't realize that I should be saying, go sleep on the floor in the basement or something like that. Obviously, God wanted that, and I didn't do it, and that's why I don't have very many subscribers, I guess. I'm defying God. A 15-year-old deprived of a bed for 7 months after he played a prank on a younger brother. Frank defended herself at the time by calling a bedroom a privilege. I mean, kind of, but only in the sense we can't afford it, and so you kids are going to have to share a bedroom, as opposed to you're not allowed to have a bed because prank. She also described being able to eat as a privilege that her children should expect to lose for misbehavior. Maybe no on that one. She filmed multiple videos recalling times when she withheld food to punish children, and that's called evidence. You should go arrest her. So they finally did. Some viewers criticized the Franks for this, as well as their repeated assertions that children do not deserve privacy. Most of the audience, however, didn't clock this as abuse, and no wonder. The Christian right has long pushed the idea that harsh punishments are, quote, loving, and that treating your kids like property is good parenting. Christian bookstores are full of parenting books that advocate hitting children, which is often minimized with the word spanking. That makes it sound more family-friendly somehow, even though it doesn't, and it actually makes it sound more pervy, reasons why there's an X in connections. It's common to read writers like James Dobson, who claims the only reason beating kids wouldn't work is that the spanking may be too gentle. Just, if it's not working, hit them harder, right? A popular parenting book, entitled To Train Up a Child, recommends beating kids from infancy and hitting them with a switch on the grounds that an open-handed spanking isn't painful enough. Good idea. And then videotape it and put it on YouTube and then say it's not child porn because wink, wink, Christian, something else. And I don't know why there's a giant X in the middle of my name. Anyway, the viciousness, which often verges on flat-out sadism, which is why it sells to the X-rated crowd, wink, wink, goes a long way toward explaining the apparently bottomless yearning for Duggar-style propaganda. Bottomless. It all is about reassuring conservative Christians that all this religious oppression and cruelty is justified. The images of smiling blonde children chasing butterflies in a field under the gaze of beatific blonde parents tells a story they desperately want to hear. That it's okay to beat and starve kids because look at this family and look at all this harmony and joy that it will eventually produce. It's not true, of course, but the need to believe that they're one more spanking away from Christian utopia clearly drives a lot of people to consume this Hallmark-style propaganda by the bucketfuls. I wonder what Hallmark thinks of being associated with beating children's naked buttocks on film. Worse, this notion that harsh discipline is the key to living this saccharine image is used to justify all manner of hurtful policies. Anti-choice advocates I've ruined the sentence, but anti-choice activists advocate for abortion bans by suggesting that forced childbirth will turn women from hussies to glowing mothers, gratefully cuddling babies they didn't even know they needed. The current mania for book banning and bullying LGBTQ students in schools is fueled by the notion that there are innocent Christian families that need protection. They don't want to hear about things like LGBTQ people existing. And of course, this recasting of child abuse as mere discipline makes it incredibly difficult for authorities to intercede when children are in danger. One of the most striking things about the Frank story is that there seems to have been many previous moments in which outside authorities received word that the children in the home were being abused. Their eldest daughter claims that Child Protective Services and the police had been notified in the past to no avail. Insider reports that there was a visit from Child Protective Services after they took their son's bed away. In another video, Ruby Frank complains that her daughter's first grade teacher was clearly uncomfortable when Frank forced the girl to skip lunch. The police, social workers, and teachers are not to blame, however. They're often prevented from doing anything to interfere in child abuse because Republicans, at the behest of the Christian right and under their guise of, here it is, parents' rights. If you didn't think that was a dangerous phrase, the way it's being used by Youngkin, it can be used this way too. Under the guise of of parents' rights, the Republicans, at the behest of the Christian right, implement laws that make it very hard for authorities to deal with abusive parents. In many states, for instance, it's against the law for one adult to hit another adult, but you are allowed to hit a child so long as it doesn't bruise or break the skin. The teacher may not like watching a kid go hungry at lunch, but until the kid is in medical danger, it's not against the law in Utah. Republicans are so hostile to laws protecting the safety and well-being of children that they've even blocked the U.S. from ratifying the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, making ours the only nation in the world that does not recognize the human rights of children, but instead turns them into maybe wink wink X content. Wink, because every accusation is a confession. As Human Rights Watch explained in a recent report, the U.S. states overwhelmingly fail to live up to key standards on the issues of child marriage, wink, corporal punishment on film, wink, child labor, and juvenile justice. As Jill Filipovich says, do I pronounce her name correctly? I mean, we know who she is, and it's always in writing. She's a great writer, and we don't say the name out loud very often. But anyways, you know who we're talking about. She explained in her write-up of the report, and you can take a look at it linked herein, over and over again, the worst states for children are clustered around the pro-life Bible Belt, and the map of the states that are the worst for children looks a lot like a map of red states America. The same religious right that treats women like second-class citizens takes a similar view of the humanity of children, treating them more like property than people. Ruby Frank's just the latest in a long line of stories that illustrate the gap between the image the Christian right likes to portray and the ugly reality just under the surface. Millions of dollars every year spills into an industry framing conservative Christianity as a romanticized world full of beaming white people living in bucolic environs, untroubled by the problems that the sinners of the world supposedly bring upon themselves. In the big cities, of course. The image of the emaciated 12-year-old boy with rope burns and duct tape on his limbs, slipping out of the window of a pricey McMansion, is an alarmingly resonant symbol of reality. Behind that spiffy, shiny Christian exterior is all too often a world where the most vulnerable people are trapped and malnourished. That's the end of the story, but I felt I had to fight myself to get to the end here, as I'm thinking about the image of the emaciated 12-year-old boy with rope burns and duct tape on his limbs, right? That you will then see that image. I mean, that's content, right? We got to capture that. You'll end up seeing that image or hearing that image invoked in another exercise of every accusation being a confession. Like if they had that picture, you would just within a matter of months find QAnon weirdos, Christian rightist weirdos, Dominionist weirdos, you name it, publishing that picture online and claiming that it's a, evil Democrat, operation in the basement of a pizza place somewhere, and that just proves that they've been right the whole time, that they're vampire pedophiles, and it's a conspiracy involving every Democrat in the world, and something, blah, 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 even though it's a picture of Ruby Frank's kids escaping from their house. They'll just repurpose it and relabel it and lie about what it is and use that. And, they'll probably just reproduce the whole thing, right? Another way to exploit the same imagery online at YouTube and make millions doing it. They abuse their own kids. They film it. They say it's parents' rights and godly upbringing. If they get busted for that, then they just change the labels and say, this is a picture of the kids we liberated from the blood-drinking cult in the basement of the pizza place. They'll get us coming and going. While they're doing it, they're making money, and when they get busted, they find a different way of making money by blaming it on someone else. Happy Friday. Hope you enjoy your weekend. There are other stories, of course, that I have been holding on to for a little while and need to share with you. We should bring you up to date on the news from the courtrooms. Yesterday was a courtroom-heavy day. The results are in the contempt of Congress case against Peter Navarro. We were talking about him pacing around like a maniac in the courtroom, and it didn't take long for the jury to understand what was going on. They came back very quickly with a conviction. The verdict made Mr. Navarro, because I'm reading you the New York Times, the second top advisor to former President Donald J. Trump to be found guilty of contempt for defying the House committee's investigation. This was, of course, subpoenas from the January 6th committee. He ignored them. Then he pretended he never got them. Then he pretended he didn't have to go anyway, an executive privilege or something. And then he paced around the room until they found him guilty. Zach Montague reports this for the New York Times. Navarro, of course, a former trade advisor for some reason to President Trump, was convicted on Thursday of 2 counts of criminal contempt of Congress for defying a subpoena from the House Select Committee investigating January 6th attack. The verdict coming after nearly 4 hours, of deliberation in federal district court in Washington made Mr. Navarro the second top advisor to be found guilty in connection to the committee's inquiry, the other being Stephen K. G.B. Bannon. The shambling mound of a former strategist for Mr. Trump, who was convicted of the same offense last summer and who faces 4 months in prison, though remains free pending appeal for some reason. Mr. Navarro, 74, stood to the side of his lawyer's table, stroking his chin as the verdict was read aloud. Each count carries a maximum of 1 year in prison and a fine of up to $100,000. Hearing to determine the sentence has been scheduled for January. Speaking outside the courthouse afterwards, Navarro repeatedly vowed to appeal his conviction. Of course, why not? I am willing to go to prison to settle this issue. I am willing to do that, so it should get underway, I think. But I also know the likelihood of me going to prison is relatively small because we are right on this issue, except the court just said you are actually wrong on this issue. And his answer is, of course, we'll ask a different court. And if they say we're wrong, we'll ask another one. And if they say we're wrong, I'll get on a plane and fly to, the Cayman Islands and never come back. The jury's decision handed a victory to the House committee, which had sought to penalize senior members of the Trump administration who refused to cooperate. You can understand why. The trial also amounted to an unusual test of congressional authority. It's not all that unusual anymore. Since the 1970s, referrals for criminal contempt of Congress have rarely resulted in the Justice Department's bringing charges. Mr. Navarro was indicted last June on 2 misdemeanor counts of contempt, one for failing to appear for a deposition and the other for refusing to provide documents in response to a subpoena. The rapid pace of the trial reflected in part the fact that the case turned on a straightforward question, whether Navarro had willfully defied lawmakers in flouting a subpoena. Even before the trial began, Judge Amit P. Mehta, Judge Mehta, we've heard a lot about him, who presided over the case, dealt a blow to Navarro by ruling that he could not use in court what he has publicly cast as his principal defense, that Trump personally directed him not to cooperate, and he was protected by those claims of executive privilege. Navarro, a Harvard-trained economist, for whatever that's worth, evidently nothing, and a strident critic of China, devised some of the Trump administration's most adversarial trade policies toward the country. Since the pandemic took hold, he helped coordinate the United States' response by securing equipment like face masks and ventilators. But after the 2020 election, he became more focused on plans to keep Trump in power. Navarro was of particular interest to the committee because of his frequent television appearances in which he cast doubt on the election results and peddled specious claims of voter fraud. He also documented those assertions in a 3-part report on purported election irregularities, as well as in a memoir he published after he left the White House. In the book, Navarro described a strategy he had devised with Bannon known as the Green Bay Sweep, aimed at overturning the results of the election in a key swing state that had been called for Joseph R. Biden Jr., by the way, they point out, swing states, multiple, I guess, beginning with probably Wisconsin. But when the committee asked Navarro to testify last February, he repeatedly insisted that Trump had ordered him not to. By asserting executive privilege, he argued, the former president had granted him immunity from Congress's demands. And they took it to court where they test such things, and the answer was no, shut up. The question of executive privilege prompted more than a year of legal wrangling over whether Navarro could invoke that at a time when Trump was no longer president. Judge Mehta ruled last week that Navarro could not raise executive privilege in his defense, saying there was no compelling evidence that Trump had ever told him to ignore the committee. It was just him saying that Trump had said that. Asked after his verdict why he had not merely asked Mr. Trump to provide testimony that corroborated his claims, Navarro said the former president was too preoccupied with his own legal troubles. In other words, he can't come to court because he's in court right now. Wow, fantastic. You may have noticed that he's fighting 4 different indictments in 3 different jurisdictions, thousands of miles away, okay? He said, we chose not to go there. But one of the jurisdictions, of course, was the very same one in which you are currently litigating. But, thousands of miles away for other ones. Anyway, he could have provided an affidavit. Didn't do it. In closing arguments on Thursday, prosecutors and defense lawyers dueled over whether Navarro's refusal to cooperate with the committee amounted to willful defiance of Congress or simple misunderstanding. The defendant, Peter Navarro, made a choice, said Elizabeth Aloi, I don't know. You tell me, Elizabeth. I don't know why I'm being adversarial with her, but anyway, he didn't want to comply and produce documents, and he didn't want to testify, so he didn't. She's telling the right story. Detailing the House Committee's correspondence with Navarro, she said that even after the panel asked him to explain any opposition he had to giving sworn testimony, he still continued to stonewall. The defendant chose allegiance to President Trump over compliance with the subpoena. That is contempt, and that is a crime. Stanley Woodward Jr., the lawyer for Navarro and like 10,000 other people, countered that the government had not successfully shown that Navarro's failure to comply was anything other than inadvertence, accident, or mistake. I didn't know they wanted me to tell them something. Well, now that you know, will you? No. Okay. Woodward presented next to no evidence in Navarro's defense, problematic, and instead sought to poke holes in the government's case that Navarro had deliberately disregarded the committee. Where was Dr. Navarro on March 2nd, 2022? Where was he? Woodward asked. Why? Because that date was when Navarro was instructed to appear before the panel. And the answer is, we don't know. That's not actually a good answer at all. We don't know, he said. Why didn't the government present evidence to you about where Dr. Navarro was or what he was doing? And the answer is because they don't have to. It's of no interest. He was supposed to be testifying and had been subpoenaed to do so and then didn't. Where was he? That's actually evidence for the prosecution. He was subpoenaed to be here in Washington, D.C. Where was he? We don't know. Well, he wasn't here where he was supposed to be, so guilty. Thank you. Prosecutors also emphasized the role that Navarro's falsehoods may have played in drawing scores of rioters to Washington to disrupt Congress's certification of the results. That caused Mr. Woodward to bristle. So what? Telling the jury that the government was relying on emotional descriptions to tarnish Mr. Navarro's image rather than proving he ever intended to blow off lawmakers. How so? I'm not really sure. Others in Trump's inner circle cooperated with the panel in a more limited fashion and avoided criminal charges. 2 of Trump's advisors, Roger Stone and Mike Flynn, the notorious spy, appeared before the committee but declined to answer most of its questions, citing their Fifth Amendment rights. Trump's final chief of staff, Mark Meadows, and his deputy, Dan Scavino, each negotiated terms with the committee to provide documents, but not testimony. During the trial, prosecutors emphasized that Navarro could have taken a similar tack. The panel had informed Navarro that if he sought to invoke privilege, he should do so in person, as well as list any documents he believed were protected. Even if he had believed he had an excuse, it doesn't matter, the prosecutors told members of the jury moments before they left the courtroom to deliberate. He had to comply with the subpoena no matter what and assert any privileges in the way Congress set forth. Right? He didn't do it. It's an open and shut case. In other words, if you think you have executive privilege, all we ask is that you come to the committee and say, I am asserting executive privilege. I am asserting it over these things, and this is why I think it is valid. Then we'll decide later what to do, and a court will decide whether or not you were right about that or whether we were right about that. But you have to come and tell us what your claim is. If you don't show up, we just record that you don't show up, and that's contempt. Sorry, you have to give us a chance to evaluate your claims. You can't avoid adjudication of all of this by claiming something from the beach somewhere and not making those claims before us and giving us a chance to take it to court and test it. So there you go. Open and shut there with that one. But he's going to appeal because something, and, playing the delay game and probably just basically appealing so that he doesn't go to jail anytime soon, and then crossing his fingers and hoping that Trump is able to steal the presidency and pardon him later. That's all this game is. We'll be right back.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
I guess it paused. Oh, there it is. Okay, well, we might have had some kind of glitch, but now at least we've got the rest of the music. That was weird. Okay. I'm not, who knows what button I may have inadvertently pressed there, but now I'll press the button for getting back into the flow of things. I got one segment left. I've got an important thing to share with you that might eat up the whole segment and more, and yet some other things that I really do want to share with you too. So let's try and do it in the briefest fashion possible. I should first acknowledge that this comes to us from our social media friend Warfare Class, sometimes identified as Employee of the Month on, back end Twitter, but also these days on Mastodon. He also followed up with an email making sure that we would see this thing. And it's a very long and in-depth explainer by way of follow-up to the situation that Greg raised, and I guess Armando was also interested in because he's tagged in this thing too, of the Wisconsin State Supreme Court impeachment story, which I think what we're in my skimming of the reading of this thing, it's a very long explainer. Let's open it up and I'll tell you what it's about. And sometimes Pocket gives us an estimation of the amount of time it would take to read such an entry, and this thing clocks in at 74 minutes. I'm not certain how accurate that is. Generally, they are underestimating the amount of time. Certainly, the amount of time it takes me to read through anything, because I interrupt myself all the time. But this is a very long, scholarly level piece from State Democracy Research Initiative, not Ohio State, but the State Democracy Research Initiative at the University of Wisconsin Law School. And it is offered up just a few days ago as an explainer. I know it's an explainer because the title is Explainer, Judicial Recusal in Wisconsin and Beyond. Derek Klinger, Senior Staff Attorney, and Professor Robert Yablon, Yablon, Faculty Co-Director, are the named authors in this piece. And there's an awfully long, it's so long it has a table of contents. And I think what we can glean from skimming the table of contents or reading through it here, there's an introduction, there's a background on the law of judicial recusal, federal constitutional standards of recusal, Wisconsin-specific recusal rules. Part 2, recusal practice and controversies. Recusal in Wisconsin is examined, other states and federal courts examined separately, and then a conclusion. We might have to jump directly to the conclusion because we don't have 74 minutes to read it, but you will over the weekend if you want this kind of in-depth background. I think what they're basically arguing here makes a lot of sense intuitively. We should be open to this. When Greg told us what was going on or what we feared might be going on, and we heard, for instance, Ken Paxton is impeached as Texas Attorney General. And the rules are there that while he's impeached, he is at least temporarily suspended from duty as Attorney General. And that we said, okay, great, sounds good, because Ken Paxton is a super jerk and a criminal, and we want this to happen. Then he said, well, the same rule obtains in Wisconsin, while Janet Protasewicz might be impeached. While she is under impeachment, she too would be suspended from duty and sidelined, and that's a bad thing because 1, she hasn't done anything yet, and 2, the result is a perversion of the democratic, the will of the voters. She was just elected to this position and hasn't done anything, and she would be suspended, and the victory that the voters determined they wanted to have on the Supreme Court would be erased for them, and we get thrown back to a 3-3 tie in which they can't do anything. And it just didn't seem nearly as good an idea anymore now that somebody, well, yes, true, there's the partisan thing, absolutely, making it difficult to swallow, but also the fact that Paxton had done things and Protasewicz had not. Now, Republicans accuse her of having done things. Why, she said she would do this. Yeah, in an election campaign. That's what we ask of people when they run for office. Anyway, what I think is happening here is, if I understood my skim of the article, is that there's a difference in the nature of the positions, Attorney General and Supreme Court Justice, both in terms of what they're asked to do. Like, you can't be the chief law enforcement officer, I suppose, if you are under indictment. And it's also easy to see what would happen. How do the functions of the Attorney General get taken care of? These are necessary functions. Texas, ostensibly has to have an Attorney General because apparently they say they have laws down there. I'm not sure, but, that's the allegation. And somebody has to be the chief law enforcement officer. But the thing is, if you suspend the Attorney General from that job, there's a deputy, or probably several of them, but at least one of whom is probably designated by law to step in and fulfill the function as an acting Attorney General for Texas. Not the case on the Supreme Court of Wisconsin or the Supreme Court of anywhere else. There's no law by which their chief clerk, for instance, if they have such a position, which they really don't, but that one of the clerks or another judge steps in and fills in the panel. It just stays tied 3-3. In addition to which, it is there is a question of the balance of power and checks and balances between the branches of state government, to, you know, which operates on the same principle, presumably, of separation of powers. Although, I mean, I guess there's a separation of powers issue could be manufactured anyway. It might not be quite as impactful, given that I guess it's probably the legislature which writes the rules and orders that the Attorney General would be suspended from duty pending the outcome of the impeachment trial. It would be the legislative branch telling the executive branch that they have to step aside. Here, it would be the legislative branch telling the judicial branch that they have to step aside. But again, I think probably the big difference in the pictures is, well, we are telling the executive branch that they have to push aside an executive official, but then they can replace him with another executive official to do the job. Whereas in the Wisconsin case, you're telling the judicial branch that it has to step aside and that nobody can step in and do the job. And I'm not certain that that's going to fly. But then the bigger argument is more like an analog to the federal situation, and particularly the federal Supreme Court situation, in which basically it comes down to the justice's individual decision to recuse or not based on their own judgment, and that recusal ought not to be something that one branch can force on the judicial branch. For some reason, I guess we hold out the judicial branch is different. And maybe it is the fact that there isn't anyone who can step in and fulfill the role in the same way. I don't know whether they address that because it's a huge article. But their conclusion, just so that there's at least something scholarly and directly from them on the record for today, the idea, it begins, behind recusal requirements is straightforward. And I mean, I guess really we should lay the groundwork by saying what they're looking for here is a recusal either from deciding any cases, or certainly any cases that would have something to do with the wrongdoing, the bad behavior with which the impeached officials are ordinarily accused ahead of time. What you're asking for here is a recusal. And maybe in their examination of the existing Wisconsin statutes, they simply reveal that there isn't any legislative compulsion to push the person out of office, but rather that it be put to them to recuse or not recuse. But the idea behind recusal requirements is, in general, is straightforward. Litigants are entitled to judges who will decide their cases fairly, based on law rather than personal interests or prejudices. We all understand that, I think. The rules and doctrines that implement this principle aim to protect litigants from true unfairness, but without undermining the operation of the judiciary or unduly inhibiting what judges can say or do on and off the bench. The heartland of recusal law involves judges with direct, personal, financial, or relational interests in a case. In contrast, because campaigning for office is an ordinary and accepted part of an elected state judge's role, it is relatively uncommon for parties even to seek recusal based on a judge's campaign funding sources or views expressed on the campaign trail. When litigants do invoke campaign funding or statements as ground for recusal, the usual result is that the judge declines to recuse. It's up to them. They simply say, I disagree with your assertion and I decline to recuse. As a constitutional matter, the U.S. Supreme Court has made clear that, 1, it is extraordinarily rare for due process to require recusal based on campaign support received from someone interested in litigation, and 2, that judges have a First Amendment right to express views on disputed issues while campaigning for office and at other times. Wisconsin's state-specific rules, meanwhile, specifically disclaim the need for recusal based solely on campaign contributions or expenditures and recognize that judicial candidates overstep only when they directly commit to ruling a particular way on a particular matter. Surveying prior recusal practice in Washington and around the country reveals numerous examples of judges participating in cases despite having received significant campaign support from interested individuals or groups, and despite having expressed opinions on the matters being litigated. In other words, there's no precedent for this in, at least in Wisconsin, recusal practice. Is there, though, I guess the real question that remains, given the way we heard the story originally, is there anything that would indicate that there is some sort of compulsory disqualification, or that someone has to step aside or step back from the office they hold if impeached, which is not necessarily the same thing. There's an analog there, but it's not necessarily the same thing as requesting a recusal. So let's take a look at the table of contents here and see what it offers us up and what can we read and get the gist of things. Recusal is not exactly what's going on here, but let's see. There's some recusal practice and controversies in Wisconsin. Judge Michael Gableman, remember him? Gableman's 2008 campaign remarks, I guess, was once used as a premise to ask for recusal. There's campaign support for Justices Annette Ziegler and Michael Gableman, and a 2010 rulemaking that resulted. Campaign support for Justice Louis Butler. John Doe campaign finance investigation failed. 2017 rulemaking and campaign finance changes is examined after that. Campaign spending under the current approach to recusal, and in a table of the largest financial backers of Wisconsin's 5 most recent contested Supreme Court elections. Interesting. Then a comparison to other state and federal courts. Let me read the introduction here and see what the basis of their investigation is, just to give us, probably should have read that first. Just a month after joining Wisconsin's Supreme Court, Justice Janet Protasiewicz faces calls to recuse, which is not the same thing as the impeachment, calls to recuse from 2 pending lawsuits that challenge Wisconsin's state legislative districts as unlawful partisan gerrymanders. In a motion requesting her recusal, the state's Republican-led legislature and some of its members invoke both the federal constitution and state judicial ethics rules. They object to Justice Protasiewicz's participation in the redistricting cases on 2 main grounds. First, they note that Justice Protasiewicz's her campaign, received significant financial support from the Democratic Party of Wisconsin, which they describe as having a substantial interest in these cases, although it's not a party in the case. That's a problem. Second, lawmakers argue that comments Justice Protasiewicz made on the campaign trail show that she has improperly prejudged the cases. They point in particular to her statements that Wisconsin has, quote, amongst the most gerrymandered maps in the country, that the maps are rigged and unfair, and that the dissent in the state's prior redistricting case is what I will tell you I agree with. If Justice Protasiewicz were required to recuse, the redistricting actions might be heard by only 6 justices, a recipe for potential deadlock, given those justices' 3-3 ideological divide. Even before the legislature filed a recusal motion, one of Justice Protasiewicz's colleagues, Justice Rebecca Bradley, filed an unusual dissent from a scheduling order in which she lamented that despite receiving nearly $10 million from the Democrat Party of Wisconsin and declaring the maps rigged, Protasiewicz has not recused herself from the case. Justice Bradley suggested that the due process principles require Protasiewicz to step aside, even without a formal recusal request, and that her failure to do so showcases that justice is now for sale in Wisconsin. This explainer offers legal and practical context for this high-stakes recusal controversy. But again, it might not be any guide in an impeachment. So I'll warn you of that. It begins by describing the relevant federal and Wisconsin-specific legal standards for recusal. It then gives examples from Wisconsin and around the country of other instances in which recusal has and has not been required. The purpose of this explainer is to describe existing recusal rules, precedents, and practices, not to endorse or criticize them or to express a view on what the law of recusal should be. But unfortunately, it doesn't posit anywhere that I can see in my quick skim that it is analogous to an impeachment proceeding. And it may just well be the case that there is still an existing Wisconsin-specific statute that requires, if not recusal, suspension from office pending the outcome of an impeachment trial. So, I don't know. We'll wait and see whether anything is offered that draws that parallel or in any way asserts that is not the case, that there is no such statute. But so far, nothing. Maybe by Monday we'll hear something. But okay, but at any rate, the recusal law and the body of precedent will inform, I think, the arguments about whether or not, and you could probably use this to analogize to if there were a statute requiring suspension from duties pending the outcome of the impeachment trial, if there was to be one, or if there weren't to be one, but if the impeachment were to go forward, that is, then you might sue and say this suspension is unconstitutional, either federally or under the state constitution, for the following reasons. We analogize to a recusal request, and it would not be at all clear that the basis would be there to request a recusal or much less force one under judicial ethics rules, given that Wisconsin recusal practice absolutely contemplates and has contemplated in the past when conservative justices were questioned about the need for recusal, does recognize an exception for things done in a campaign context. So, if you wouldn't even be forced to recuse, I don't see how you could be suspended from duty against your will either. And you would argue that, yes, there is a statute that purports to demand that, but the statute is unconstitutional under at least the state of Wisconsin's constitution, if not the federal constitution. So I guess we'll have to evaluate that. Something you can think about over the weekend. And that gives us a few minutes left. Now we can, I guess, dispense with that and push it off until we can do further research to take a look at a couple of the other stories that I held in reserve. And let's see, which ones should we bring forward? How about this one? I think this is a nice result from the sentences handed down to some of the Proud Boys in their trials. This is an interesting, different reason why we should be happy about this, from Will Bunch at the Philadelphia Inquirer. And he's almost always a good read, no matter what he's talking about. A Philly woman's Proud Boy harasser, because that's what Proud Boys are proud of, harassing women, heads to prison. Yay! Will Trump set him free? Well, not if we don't make that mistake again, but that's just meant to scare us a little bit, and with good reason. But let's get to the underlying story. A 15-year sentence for Philly's Proud Boy chief means relief for a local activist targeted by harassment. Will Trump free her tormentor? Well, when you put it that way, yes, of course he would, if he were given the chance to do that. But since we all hope, I don't know, he'll drop dead before that ever happens, or whatever. And I guess the real question is, would any Republican pardon her harasser? Because they're all now promising to do that. Ron DeSantis on downward. That's the thing that the press is willing to ask them and press every Republican on. They have to answer for whether or not they too would pardon these people. And they're, of course, putting that idea in their head and forcing them to pledge that they would, because no one wants to displease Trump. The threatening late-night visits to her Philadelphia home. The piece begins. The strange men, one with a visible firearm, walking up and down her residential neighborhood, calling out her name. That's what these people do, by the way, in case you didn't know. The goons who once rallied in the park across the street and called for her to be kidnapped off her front porch. And the time they placed flyers on telephone poles with the ridiculous false allegation that she was a registered sex offender. The constant online harassment. Who are we talking about? For Gwen Snyder, a veteran political organizer, and you may even follow her or have followed her on Twitter until you abandoned that platform. You'll find her elsewhere, I'm sure. For Gwen Snyder, a veteran political organizer and writer who researches and exposes right-wing extremism, the years of harassment by the violent, notorious Proud Boys are over. For now. It should have been the final chapter last month when the leader of the Proud Boys Philadelphia chapter, Zachary Rehl, R-E-H-L, Rail, I don't know, was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for his role with other leaders of the right-wing paramilitary group, including ex-national leader Enrique Tarrio, in the January 6th insurrection on Capitol Hill. Snyder told me, not me, but Will, that Rehl was one of many Proud Boys who took part in harassing her over those crazy years leading up to January 6th, showing up on the group's online Telegram channel to whip up support for their rally outside her home, which, remember, Republicans are totally against. Although she has complicated feelings about Rehl's sentencing, Snyder obviously feels some relief that Rehl is currently behind bars and that his Philadelphia outfit is in a state of disarray. A suspected Proud Boy, Kyle Boell, B-O-E-L-L, I don't know, pled guilty to harassing Snyder in 2022, according to officials. I personally feel it's a safer time if people who have a personal grudge against me are behind bars, Snyder told me this week, but the activist is also well aware that Rehl could be a free man and that right-wing radicals could be empowered and emboldened in just 16 short months if Donald Trump regains the presidency, or any Republican really, I would hasten to add. The all but certain GOP 2024 presidential nominee has made it clear in no uncertain terms, linked if you want to read it, that he will use or abuse, according to most experts, his pardon powers to free most of the hundreds convicted so far on criminal charges stemming from the insurrection almost immediately upon a possible return to the White House on January 20th, 2025, unless, of course, he doesn't have a pen handy or sends the paperwork to the wrong place or what have you. There is every reason to, or sells the pardons outright. I mean, why not do that? I mean, really, that's the obvious answer for Trump. If you pay me $100,000, I will pardon you. If you don't, no pardon. And if you try to convict me for selling the pardons, I will pardon myself. Seems like pretty obvious, actually. Anyway, there's every reason to assume that that would include Rehl, Tarrio, and the rest of the Proud Boys leadership convicted of seditious conspiracy, unless, of course, they can't come up with the money. I know he'll pardon me. Proud Boys higher-up Joe Biggs, who was sentenced to 17 years behind bars on the same day as Rehl, told right-wing radio hosts and January 6 attendee Alex Jones in an interview last week from his jail cell, "I believe that with all my heart," which is as good as saying you're never going to get it unless you can come up with the money. Those are the stakes. That was the tagline from one of the most famous political TV ads in U.S. history, Lyndon Johnson's 1964 Daisy spot that superimposed a mushroom cloud explosion over a flower-picking 3-year-old girl to claim that a Barry Goldwater victory would risk a nuclear war. 60 years later, the stakes are just as high, except a Trump victory threatens a metaphorical neutron bomb that will destroy the American way of justice and democracy itself. The first step to saving the American experiment, launched right here in Zach Rehl's hometown in 1776, remember, it's 1776 all over again, involves making sure voters understand the stakes on November 5th, 2024. Those stakes include Trump's plans to implement Project 2025, you all heard about that, a PowerPoint for demolishing democratic governance in the guise of undoing, quote, the administrative state. Voters must also understand Trump's plan to surrender to fossil fuel interests in the war on climate change, right as wildfires and floods are threatening our way of life, and, of course, Trump's threats to unleash the U.S. justice system to avenge his political enemies. In that context, Trump's pardon promises to the January 6th defendants, including roughly 500 convicted so far, many of them by juries of their peers, might not be the most serious consequence if the 45th president also becomes the 47th, but it might be the most outrageous. I'm inclined to pardon many of them, Trump said at a May town hall hosted by CNN in New Hampshire. I can't say for every single one because a couple of them probably they got out of control. Or don't have enough money to pay me, let's say. In 2022, Trump even promised that his government would apologize to those who never apologize, unless, of course, it is to my fervent supporters. They would apologize to those who have been prosecuted for storming the Capitol in a riot blamed for 5 deaths and scores of injured police. Trump, of course, got to get the pop-up out of the way, has lied more than 30,000 times during his time in the White House, but there's no reason to doubt that he's telling the truth about this. Well, I have some doubts because I think he's going to sell them. His abuse of the president's constitutional pardon powers, intended as an olive branch to federal felons who have been truly reformed, as a get-out-of-jail-free card for his corrupt friends and cronies like Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, Steve Bannon, or ex-Sheriff Joe Arpaio, was one of his first forays into American dictatorship. What's more, the unrepentant Trump even spoke at a couple of fundraisers on behalf of January 6th defendants, one of them just 2 days before he surrendered to Georgia authorities on felony charges stemming from his own election interference efforts. The ex-president loaned his voice to a recording of the Star-Spangled Banner, rebranded as Justice for All, by a group of jailed insurrectionists calling themselves the J6 Prison Choir. My goodness. It's no wonder that Real, the Philly Proud Boy chieftain, called from jail into a show hosted by the right-wing InfoWars in May and begged for mercy from a would-be Trump presidency. If you get back into office, President Trump, if you're listening, Real was recorded pleading, please look into this and really look into pardons and everything like that. He's got the whole thing organized. He understands exactly what's going on. All right. Time for us, though, to exit from the show for today. There's more about this and about the abuse of the system that the Proud Boys are now begging for from a would-be President Trump. And you can read all about it in Will Bunch's column. Wow. Okay. But, yeah, you should remember that. And I think it's probably good speculation. Why wouldn't he just sell the pardons at that point? There's no more office that he can win election to, nor any reason to, pay attention to the Constitution at that point anyhow. But, yeah, I mean, I guess probably a good bet and something to think about is that these guys are going to have to sell it. But maybe he'll do a fundraiser for them so that they can turn the money over to him. After all, I did read in the news this morning that Trump is, or maybe he already did, headlining a so-called fundraiser, I think at Mar-a-Lago, $100,000 a plate dinner, I think I saw mentioned, in order to help him pay his legal bills. Trump could help pay his legal bills, but he's not going to do that. He wants to do it with someone else's money. And so, yeah, why not sell pardons for $1 million a piece if he can headline a fundraiser for those people, as opposed to his donating the $1 million price. He'll just raise it off of the backs of his most fervent supporters. Anyway, time to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next right here on Netroots Radio. Let's see what I can cram in before we're out of here. The D.C. grand jury that indicted Donald Trump for his efforts to overturn his 2020 election losses met again for the first time in 4 weeks. Oh, I also read today is the day we're supposed to get that special grand jury report from Fulton County too, right?
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Also stories about Republicans freaking out over imaginary COVID mandates. Brett Kavanaugh said that he's hopeful the Supreme Court will soon take specific steps to deal with ethics issues at the court. And California lawmakers approved a new tax for guns and ammunition to pay for school safety improvements. Ooh, that's a clever one. Stay tuned for more next.